Here are my note cards for the speech.
So, did you know that the election of 2000 between Bush 43 and Al Gore was decided by 550,000 votes? That's less than half a percentage point of America's total eligible voter population. And if more people had come out, it might have made the 9/11 response a lot different. So here at home, we're not too much better. Earlier this year, Hoover had their election for mayor, and they only got 13,000 votes out of 90,000 citizens. And Tuscaloosa's earlier this year didn't do any better. They only had 11% of their vote come out. So today, we're going to talk about some of the problems with our election system and how mandatory voting would be a step in the right direction towards democracy. Currently, there are 21 countries that practice mandatory voting. Belgium is the oldest. They've had men required to vote since 1893. And Australia is probably the biggest. They just celebrated 100 years last year of mandatory voting. So here at home, we don't do too well because our local elections around the country usually get in the 30% range, maybe 40 if you get lucky. Presidential elections get a little bit better. They get up in the 60s, 66, 67% range. But I think we could get better democracy if we got closer to Australia. They usually get in the 90s almost every time with their mandatory voting. That sounds like a democracy of the people right there. So there's a couple reasons that people don't come out to the polls on voting day sometimes. The simpler one would be transportation. Sometimes people just can't make it for whatever reason, whether it be medical or financial, who knows. We could allocate some tax funds from some useless places and put it towards public transportation on voting day. I think that would be a good way to solve it, And you got kind of the bigger one, I think, is a lot of people just feel disenfranchised by the system. They just feel like their vote doesn't count, voting doesn't work, the whole election system is just broken. And that's a terrible road to keep going down because that's just the true downfall of democracy and would just implode all of it. People have to have faith in the voting system. I think mandatory voting would help do that through all these things. So mandatory voting would also educate those people. You need a more educated populace. They would get more educated on policies and what politicians are running on. A lot of people don't even know these things, but mandatory voting, I think, would help stir that in them. And that would be a good thing because knowledge is what gives the people the power, while voting is what holds politicians accountable and our government accountable to enacting the people's will. So we kind of need that for democracy. One of the things that low voter turnout tends to create is political polarization, because now you have politicians fighting to get people to come out to vote and make sure they get the number of votes that they need. It tends to lead to demagoguery, where people just play out people's fears and emotions, stereotypes, and make sure they can rile them up enough to come out and vote. That's a terrible way of getting vote and for politicians to campaign. Mandatory voting would already put butts in those voting seats. It would keep politicians from chasing the number of votes and getting people to come out, and then they could start actually appealing to the people and not just chasing for the votes. It tends to lead to a lot of bad policies, skewed policies that only affect a certain loud minority of people. And Joe Blow sitting at home thinking nothing matters and voting doesn't count, he never gets his daily things. And we need to get these people to vote. So one other thing that we should include in elections is questions just based on the temperance of the country on topics. Because a lot of the times your politicians citizens don't agree with all of the views of politicians, but they still vote for them. So we need to know the countrymen's opinions on topics instead of just who they're voting for. That way we can keep the government accountable to what the country wants. Of course, with mandated voting, you're going to have penalties. You could do a small financial penalty. Australia has one that's equivalent to about $20 American. That's not too bad. But I think that the better penalty would be community service, because voting needs to be seen as more of a civic duty. And if you're not going to perform this duty, then we have another good thing where you can contribute to society. You know, and then there's a lot of people that feel like mandated voting would be a violation of the First Amendment, of compelling speech. And some people don't like that, but I think you just need to change your mindset to voting being more of a civic duty. That's how a democracy is supposed to thrive, is hearing from all of the people. You got the civic duty of paying taxes, of jury duty. I mean, that's just things that the country needs from its populace. You know, so hopefully today you were able to learn a few things that could sway you to the opinion of mandatory voting a little bit. It would be a good thing for the country. It would be better for the democracy. You would have less polarization and more representation. We need to start supporting policies that are going to make voting more important and more of a duty. Democracy should belong to everybody, not just the loud.